All right, so we'll get started for the next session here. We titled it for Artificial Intelligence for Human Capital and Economic Development. So when we talk about AI's impact from education, we interact a lot of people in Singapore, in Boston, everywhere. Almost every single person who's a parent, whenever we talk about it, their eyes really lit up, saying, what should my kids learn? Right. Here, AI's impact on that, you can see there are two really different categories. One is how to learn. The same question is what to learn. The first one was saying how AI can enhance the learning experience. The second one is ask what type of knowledge become more useful, more meaningful here. Right? So that's the first half on the human capital. But also with a link to what's the AI's impact on economic development at the collective level here. Right? So I want to position this session within the three theme setting. This is the second one. The previous one talked about the physical digital interface, the specific technology. But the second one asking how is AI going to do for our individual prosperity and also the economic development. For this session, we designed it with three parts. The first, we'd like to invite Professor Sanjay Sarma to give a remark about his vision of a future of education and future learning. Besides being a mechanical engineer professor, Sanjay founded and been running the open learning of MIT, really thinks through this question for a decade. Right. So really glad that Sanjay will join us to give this remark. After that, we'll have a T4, T5 researchers to present their research, and then we'll have a panel following that. Right. So now let's join me invite Professor Sanjay Sarma to present.
Thank you, Jinhua. Let me just kick things off with a quiz. I'm a professor. I've got to ask you questions. How much do you think was spent on AI by industry and companies last year? Billions, good. How many? How many billions? 200. Not bad. 150 billion. That's a six-fold increase from 2016. Next year it'll be 180 billion. What is the GDP of Singapore? 500. 500. PC, of course, knows. he's been planning this for decades. What is 2030, by the way? AI spending will be $800 billion, right? Who the hell knows? But that's the projection. How much do you think education spending was as a market in 2022? I asked about 2022 because I have the number in my head. No, it's not so bad. Humanity is not so bad, okay? I know you thought I was going to say it's less than AI. It's 6 trillion. But think about it. 6 trillion, but that's every human being, every child on the planet. And AI spending has increased six-fold in the last 6 years. And by 2030, it'll be 800 billion. And $800 billion being spent effectively in increasing the productivity of machines. And I think we're at a very existential moment. So I want to say it's a pleasure, but it's really with some concern that I speak about this, that I think we're at a pivotal moment in humanity, in the progress of humanity. And we talk about climate change as existential. It's come to a point where I believe, personally, that we should talk about tech change as existential because of the implications on employment. Now, labor economists like to say that, listen, productivity increases will outweigh job loss. And the classical example that is used is that of tellers, bank tellers, right? ATMs appeared in 1965 around, and people thought, my God, bank tellers will lose their jobs. And this is the classical case. It's quoted in every labor economics paper. By the 1980s, the number of bank tellers went from 300,000 in the US in 1965 to 600,000. So look, jobs actually went up. ATMs didn't take jobs away. What that neglects to capture is that, and the reason is, of course, people went up the cognitive stack, right? No longer were you using a calculator and filling a paper register to see, who had debited how much amount. The teller was selling mortgages, CDs, things like that. But bank teller ATMs had the courtesy of taking 15 years to penetrate the market. The challenge right now is the sheer speed and, of course, the shock that it'll create. And if you look at what's happening and through all the amazing conversations that have occurred today, and some of us have had over the last few days and over the last few years, really, if you look at computation used to be in the realm of the structured. What I mean by that is if you had an Excel spreadsheet, right? Excel software could do something with it. But if you had your notes just typed up randomly, they were useless. They were in a different world. That gap has been breached suddenly by large language models. We have breached the gap between the structured and the unstructured, right? The fact that you can take your Zoom transcript and create a summary is a clear indication of that. Another barrier that's been breached is the one between supervised learning. All of machine learning is based on supervised learning, right? Labeled data sets, to unsupervised learning, which is basically the eye of Sauron, which is what these AI systems are, scouring the text that they can find anywhere and making sense out of it, because that's what large language models do. It's unsupervised learning. And by the way, that's what Alex, who gave a wonderful presentation earlier, that's what we're trying to do with implicit attention. We're trying to do learning from unstructured data, which is human attention. Which brings me to a third breakthrough, which is explicit versus implicit. Used to be that a lot of learning was about explicitizing stuff. Data sets with this is a cat, this is a dog, that's making information explicit. Human beings have a lot of implicit information. And that's another thing that's being breached, interestingly. And if you study, embedding spaces, et cetera, it's a very, very profound concept that we can capture nuances in language in a 1,536 dimension space. It's quite extraordinary. They can take two vectors, take the dot product, and see if two sentences or two words are the same. Really amazing. The classical example from about 10 years ago. In this space, king minus minus man plus woman gives you basically queen in this vector space, right? The fact that in this massive space we can reduce all these nuances is pretty stunning. So these are the breakthroughs that, and of course, low level and high level. Daniela talks about how with LLMs you can do high level instructions to robots, and you can infer, but in fact, most of computation is at a very low level, and the stack is getting fleshed out. All these things mean that we're really, as I said, at an existential moment in human capital. And at a time when other things are happening too. For example, access to NVIDIA chips, which are in short supply, right? Geopolitics, somewhat triggered by chips. Human rights concerns about where the data is coming from. But also things like, whether AI is fair, privacy, et cetera, et cetera. So, and to make matters worse, the other thing about LLMs is that other technologies used to impact blue-collar jobs. But there's this great, unfortunately, somewhat sobering report from the ILO that says, and you know this, that these technologies are going to affect white-collar jobs. They're going to affect women more than men. They're going to impact high education countries more than countries where people are working with their hands. And of course, with robotics, as we heard in the last panel, that too will be bridged. By the way, women more than men, because more women do cognitive jobs, more men do physical jobs. And so because AI is cognitive in what it does, women's jobs are more at risk. So from an education perspective, this means that we need to revisit what we mean by education. I mean, the social contract of education is somewhat broken if you think about it, right? The social contract is, thou shalt go to school, first 12 years, then 4 years, you're set for life, right? It's like exercising until you're 21 and never have to go to the gym again. Tried it, doesn't work. Been there, done that. So what we have to do is pretty fundamentally rethink how education occurs. And we've got to, first of all, in my view, get rid of the word education. Education is something you do to someone. It's based on a pretty fundamental misunderstanding of what human learning is. Alex visited me in Kuala Lumpur a couple of days ago, and we spent all day sightseeing and then talking about how LLMs work and how multi-headed attention works and things like that. How much thought do we give to learning? How much research has been done on learning, on the neuroscience, on memories, on forgetting? It turns out a lot is known, but most educational institutions have no idea how the brain works. And here we are talking about AI and getting the nuance of AI. So we have to fundamentally reinvent many aspects of education. Many of us are doing it. There's a lot of amazing research happening, but it's got to hit scale. Because that $6 trillion is deploying solutions that actually don't work. That's the real challenge. It's not that we're spending $6 trillion, or $8 trillion in 2030, by the way. It is that we're spending it on a medicine that does not work. Not only does it not work, it has been proven to not work. And the reason is, the way we deliver education is not designed to achieve learning. And that has to do with the way the human brain forms models, creates actions, et cetera, et cetera. So without going into a long-winded explanation, just go buy my book, Grasp. I'm just kidding. I'll just say that we have to reinvent 4 things. One is pedagogy, which is how learning ought to occur. And there's a lot of work on it. Goes back to people like Eric Mazur at Harvard, Carl Wyman, the Nobel laureate at Stanford, and a bunch of us have been talking about this for years. So we know what to do, but we don't do it. That's a whole other story. Curricula. Only 3 years ago, we were all asking our kids to go learn coding. Remember? You remember coding? Right? The right programs? Okay. Curricula have to be rethought very fundamentally. Particularly because, just as with tellers, we need to have young people and older people climb the cognitive stack. Because this tiger is at the bottom of the tree, right? And it's learning to climb up. And we need to climb up the stack. So the curricula have to be more meta, which is not just content, but how to learn content. So that's got to be pretty fundamental. I think the third thing is the mode of delivery has to change. Cannot be that to learn, you got to come and sit in a classroom and have a professor like me bore you, right? And that's hybrid education. There's a lot, Jinhua mentioned, we did a lot of that at MIT. And finally, the social contract has to change. The fact is that the way the degree is designed today, if you have a degree, you're done. Nope, you're not done. Your degree has a half-life. We do this in other professions, medicine, for example, flying, right? You got to go in and get a renewal. And this is, unfortunately, the new reality, and our institutions will have to evolve to embrace all this. So with that sobering thought, I'll leave you to more positive thoughts. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.